Almost exactly a year since Matthew Hedges was first arrested in the United Arab Emirates, he sits once again at home in Exeter, reflecting on a period of his life which defies belief, but will undoubtedly affect him for years to come.
If it wasn't for Danny, I wouldn't have been able to have got through it. And I tell her this and she doesn't believe me, but if it wasn't for her, I genuinely don't believe I would actually be alive.
It was in May last year that the PhD student was arrested at Dubai airport trying to return home from a research trip. He was detained in his own room with no daylight, given no legal help, and 6 months later sentenced to life in prison for spying. You were kept in what was effectively solitary confinement for 7 months. What was going through your head at the time?
It was extremely difficult to cope with, and at times I wasn't able to cope with that. And so when I had the combination of the medication that they were giving me, which was then doubled, it was increased to a significant amount. That's when it took when I wasn't able to cope, I was making myself vomit 3 times a day. I ended up doing that for 3 months. I started to self-harm and I had suicidal thoughts. So at which point they had to take me to hospital. So I literally wasn't able to cope. Back home, Daniela had begun a campaign to free Matthew, speaking to politicians and media to raise awareness of a case that saw her husband facing what amounted to psychological torture. Can you describe what it was like when that life sentence was handed down in court?
It was incredibly disappointing, discouraging, nerve-wracking, heartbreaking, and of course I don't actually even know what words to use to describe it. We weren't even allowed to say goodbye.
His Highness has decided to include Mr. Matthew Hedges among the 785 prisoners released.
Just 5 days after that life sentence, Matthew Hedges was given a presidential pardon and allowed to return home. But the couple say the Foreign Office was too slow to fully intervene, and his conviction still stands today.
In spite of the happiness, there's still this bittersweet feeling of knowing that justice hasn't actually been made. And naturally, whilst the most important thing is his freedom and to have him back and to be with him and be able to support him and for us to be together and have our lives, justice needs to be made, because I cannot even fathom the idea of other families going through the same.
A year on from the ordeal, Matthew has been diagnosed with PTSD and is still dependent on some of the drugs he needed to survive in prison. So as they try to rebuild their lives, they do so knowing nothing will quite be the same again. But at least they can try to ensure no one else has to suffer in the same way they did. Max Walsh, ITV News, Exeter.